Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secret, Chapter 5, The Whomping Willow. The end of the summer holiday came too quickly for Harry liking. He was looking forward to getting back to Hogwarts, but his month at the Borough had been the happiest of his life. It was not difficult not to feel jealous. It was difficult not to feel jealous of Ron when he thought it of the Dursley and the sort of welcome he could expect next time he turned up in private drive. On On their last evening, Mrs. Weasley conjured up a sumptuous dinner which included all of Harry's favorite things, ending with a mouth-watering trickle of pudding. Fred and George round up for that evening with a display of filibuster firework. They filled the kitchen with red and blue stars that bounced from ceiling to wall for at least half an hour. Then it was time for the last mug of hot chocolate and bed. It took a long while to get started next morning. They were up at cockcrow, but somehow they still have a great deal to do. Mrs. Weasley dashed about in bad mood, looking for spare sock and quill. People kept colliding from the stair, half dressed with bits of toast in their hand, and Mr. Weasley nearly broke his neck tripping over a stray chicken as he crossed the yard carrying Ginny's trunk to the car. Harry couldn't see how 8 people, 6 large trunks, and 2 owls and a rat were going to fit in one small Ford Angela. He had reckoned, of course, with that special feature with which Mr. Weasley had added. Not a word to Molly. He whispered to Harry as he opened the boot and showed him how it had been magically expanded so that the trunk fitted easily. When at last they were all in the car, Mrs. Weasley glanced in the back seat, where Harry, Ron, Fred, and George, and Percy were all sitting comfortably side by side. Muggles do know more than when we give them credit for, don't they? She and Ginny got into the front seat, which had been stretched so that it resembled a park bench. I mean, you never know it's roomy for the outside, would you? Mr. Weasley started up the engine, and they trundled out of the yard, Harry turning her back for a last look at the house. He barely had time to wonder what he'd seen it again when they were back. George had forgotten his box of filibuster firework. 5 minutes after that, they skidded to the hall in the yard so that Fred could run in for his broomstick. They almost reached the motorway when Ginny shrieked that she had left her diary. By the time she had clambered back to the car, they were running very late, and temper were running high. Mr. Weasley glanced at his watch and then at his wife. "Molly, dear, no, Arthur, no one would see. This little bun here is an invisible booster I install that would get us up in the air when we fly above the cloud. We'll be there in 10 minutes, and no one would be able to be any the wiser." I said, "No, Arthur, not in the broad daylight." They reached King Cross at a quarter at 2:11. Mr. Weasley dashed across the road to the trolley for their trunk, and they all hurried into the station. Harry had caught the Hogwarts Express for the previous year. The tricky bit was getting on platform 9 3/4, which was invisible to Muggle eyes. What you had to do was walk through the solid barrier dividing platform 9 and 10. It didn't hurt, but it had to be done carefully so that none of the Muggle noticed you vanishing. "Percy first," said Mrs. Weasley, looking nervously at the clock overhead, which showed that they only had 5 minutes to disappear casually through the barrier. Percy struck briskly forward and vanished. Mr. Weasley went next. Fred and George followed. "I'll take Ginny, and you two come right after us," Mrs. Weasley told Harry and Ron, grabbing Ginny's hand and setting off. In the blink of an eye, they were gone. "Let's go together. We've only got a minute," Ron said to Harry. Harry made sure that Hedwig Cage was safely wedged on top of his trunk and wheeled his trolley about face to the bearer. He felt perfectly confident this was nearly as uncomfortable as using flue powder. Both of them bent low over the handle of the speed. A few feet away, they broke into a run and crash. Both trolley hit the barrier and bounced backward. Ron's trunk fell off with a loud thump. Harry was knocked off his feet, and Hedwig Cage bound on the shiny floor, and she rolled away, shrieking initially. People all around them stared, and a guard nearby yelled, "What in the blaze do you think you're doing?" "Lost control of the trolley," Harry gasped, clutching his rib as he got up. Ron Ron ran to pick up Hedwig, who was causing such a scene that there were a lot of muttering about her cruelty to animals from the surrounding crowd. "Why can't we get through?" Harry hissed to Ron. "I don't know." Ron looked wildly around. A dozen curious people were still watching them. "We're going to miss the train," Ron whispered. "I don't understand why the gateway sealed itself." Harry looked up at the giant clock with a sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach. 10 seconds, 9 seconds. He wheeled his trolley forward cautiously until it was right against the barrel, and pushed it with all his might. The metal remained solid. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. "It's gone," said Ron, sounding stunned. "The train left. What if Mom and Dad can't get back through us? Have you got any Muggle money?" Harry gave a hollow laugh. "The Dursley haven't given me pocket money for about 6 years." Ron pressed his ears to the cold barrier. "Can't hear a thing," he said tensely. "What are we going to do? I don't know how long it'll take Mom and Dad to get back to us." They looked around. People were still watching them, mainly because of Hedwig continuing screech. "I think we'll better go and wait by the car," said Harry. "We're attracting too much attention." "Harry," said Ron, his eyes gleaming. "The car!" "What about it? We can fly the car to Hogwarts." "But I thought we're stuck, right? And we're got to go get to school, haven't we? And even underage wizards aren't allowed to use magic if it's really emergency. Section I-19 or something of the restriction of thingy." Harry, feeling panic, turned suddenly to excitement. "Can you fly it?" "No problem," said Ron, wheeling his trolley around to face the exist. "Come on, let's go. If we hurry, we'll be able to follow a Hogwarts Express." And they marched off through the crowd of curious Muggle. Out of the station was and parked on the side road where the old Fort Angela was parked. Ron unlocked the car in his boot with a series of taps from his wand. They heaved their trunk back in, but Hedwig on the back seat and got into the front. "Checks no one watching," said Ron, starting the engine T with another tap of his wand. Harry stuck his head out of the window. Traffic was rumbling along the main road ahead, but their street was empty. "Okay," he said. Ron pressed a tiny silver button on the dashboard. The car around them vanished, and so did they. Harry could feel the seat vibrating beneath him, hear the engine, feel his hand on his knees and his glass on his nose, but for all he could see, he had become a pair of ice balls floating a few feet above the ground in a dingy street full of parked cars. "Let's go," said Ron's voice from his right. The ground and the dirty building on the either side fell away, jumping out of the sight as the car rose, and second, the whole of London lay smoky and glittering below them. Then there was popping noise, and the car. Harry and Ron reappeared. "Uh-oh," said Ron, jabbing the invisibility booster. "It's faulty." Both of them pummeled it. The car vanished, then it flickered back again. "Hold on," Ron yelled, and he slammed his foot on the accelerator. They shot straight to the low, woolly cloud, and everything turned dull and foggy. "Now what?" said Harry, blinking at the solid mass of cloud pressing in on them all sides. "We need to see the train to show what direction to go in," said Ron. "Dip back down again, quickly." They dropped back in beneath the cloud and twisted around their seat, squinting at the ground. "I can see it," Harry yelled. "Right ahead there." The Hogwarts Express was streaking along below them like a scarlet snake. "Due north," said Ron, checking the compass on the dashboard. "Okay, we'll just have to check it on every half an hour or so. Hold on." And they shot up through the cloud. A minute later, they burst out into a blaze of sunlight. It was a different world. The wheel of cars came the sea of fluffy cloud, the sky a bright, endless blue under the blinding white sun. "All we've got to worry about now are airplanes," said Ron. They looked at each other and started to laugh. For a long time they couldn't stop. It was as though had been plunged into fabulous dream. This, thought Harry, was surely the only way to travel past twirl and toward of snowy cloud and car. full of hot, bright sunlight, with a fat pack of toffees in the glove compartment, and the prospect of seeing Fred and George jelly his face when they landed smoothly and spectacularly on the sweeping lawn in front of Hogwarts Castle. They made regular checks on the train as they flew further and further north, each dip beneath the clouds showing them a different view. London was soon far behind them, replaced by a neat green field which gave way and turned a wide purplish moor, village with tiny toy church, and great city alive, with cars like multicolored ants. Several uneventful hours later, however, Harry had to admit that some of the fun was wearing off. The toffee had made them extremely thirsty, and they had nothing to drink. He and Ron had pulled up their jumper, but Harry's t-shirt was sticking to the back of his seat, and his glass kept sliding down the end of his sweaty nose. He had stopped noticing fantastic cloud shape now, and was thinking longingly for a train mile below, where you could buy ice-cold pumpkin juice for trolley pushed by the plump witch. Why hadn't they been able to get on platform 9 3/4? Can't be such much further, can it? Croaked Ron an hour later still, as the sun started to sink onto the floor of cloud, staining it a deep pink. Ready for another check on the train? It was still right below them, wending its way past the snow-capped mountain. It was much darker beneath the canopy of the cloud. Ron put his foot on the accelerator and drove them upward again, but as he did so, the engine began to whine. Harry and Ron exchanged nervous glances. "It's probably just tired," said Ron. "It's never been this far before." And they both pretended not to notice the whining growing louder and louder as the sky became steadily darker. Stars were blossoming in the blackness. Harry pulled his jumper back on, trying to ignore the sum of the windscreen wiper were now waving feebly as though in a protest. "Not far," said Ron, more to the car than to Harry. "Not far now," and he patted the dashboard nervously. When they flew back to beneath the cloud a little while later, then to squint through the darkness for a landmark, they knew. "There!" Harry shouted, making Ron and Hedwig jump. "Straight ahead!" So low the dark horizon, high on a cliff over the lake, stood the many-turreted and towered Hogwarts Castle. But the car began to shudder and was losing speed. "Come on!" Ron said confidently, giving the steering wheel a little shake. "Nearly there! Come on!" The engine groaned. A narrow jet of steam was issuing from under the bonnet. Harry found himself gripping the edge of his seat very hard as they flew toward the lake. The car gave a nasty wobble. Glancing out of the window, Harry saw a smooth, black, glassy surface of the water a mile below. Ron knuckled were white on the steering wheel. The car wobbled again. "Come on!" For a minute they were over the lake. The castle was right ahead. Ron put his foot down. There was a loud clunk, a splutter, and the engine died completely. "Uh-oh," said Ron in silence. And the nose of the car dropped. They were falling, gathering speed, heading straight for the solid castle wall. "No!" Ron yelled, swinging the steering wheel around. They missed the dark stone wall by inch as the car turned in a great arc, stopping, soaring over the dark greenhouses, then the vegetable patch, and then out over the black lawn, losing height all the time. Ron let go of the steering wheel completely and pulled his wand out of his back pocket. "Stop! Stop!" he yelled, blocking the dashboard and the windscreen. But they were still plummeting, the ground flying up toward them. "Mind that tree!" Harry bellowed, lunging the steering wheel, but too late. Crunch! With an ear-splitting bang of metal on the wood, they hit the thick tree trunk and dropped the ground with a heavy jolt. Steam was billowing from the under-crumbled bonnet. Hedwig was shrieking in terror. A golf ball-sized lump was throbbing on Harry's head, where he had hit the windscreen. And to his right, Ron let out a low, despairing groan. "Are you okay?" Harry said urgently. "My wand!" said Ron in a shaky voice. "Look at my wand!" It had snapped almost in two. The tip was dangling limply, held on by a few splinters. Harry opened his mouth to see he was sure to say he was sure they would be able to mend it up at school, but he never even got started. At that very moment, something hit his side of the car with the force of a charging bull, sending him lurching sideways into Ron, just as an equally heavy blow hit the roof. "What's happening?" Ron gasped, staring at the windscreen, and Harry looked around just in time to see a branch as thick as pithing smash into it. The tree that they hit was attacking them. Its trunk was bent almost double, and gnarled boughs were pummeling every inch of car it could reach. "Ah!" said Ron as another twisted limb punched a large dent in his door. The windscreen was now trembling under a hail of blows and knuckle-like twigs, and a branch as thick as a battering ram was pounding fiercely on the roof, which seemed to be caving in. Oh my god, that's a lot. "Run for it!" Ron shouted, throwing his full weight against his door, but next second he had been knocked backward into Harry's lap by a vicious uppercut from another branch. "We're done for," he moaned as the ceiling sagged, but suddenly the floor of the car was vibrating. The engine had restarted. "Reverse!" Harry yelled, and the car shot backward. The tree was still trying to hit them. They could hear its root creaking as it almost ripped itself up, lashing out of them, sped out of that up reach. That Penderon was close. "Well done, car." The car, however, reached the end of its tether, which, with two smart clunk, the door flew open, and Harry felt his seat tip sideways. Next second, he knew he was sprawled on the damp ground. A loud thud told him that the car was ejecting their luggage from the boot. Hedwig's cage flew through the air and burst open. She rose out of it, loud, angry screech, and speed off toward the castle without a backward look. Then Dent scratched, and steaming, the car rumbled off into darkness, its rear light blazing angrily. "Come back!" Ron yelled after it, banishing his broken wand. "That will kill me!" But the car disappeared from view with one last snort from its exhausted. "Can you believe our luck?" said Ron miserably, bending down to pick up Scabbard the rat. "Of all the trees we could have hit, we had to get one that hit back." He glanced over his shoulder at the ancient tree, which was still flaying its branch, threatening. "Come on," said Harry wearily. "We'd better get up to the school." It wasn't all the triumphant arrival they had pictured. Stiff, cold breeze, and they seized the end of the trunk and began dragging them up the grassy slope toward the great oak front. "I think the feast already started," said Ron, dropping his trunk at the foot of his front step and crossing quietly to look through a brightly lit window. "Hey, Harry, come, look! It's a sorting!" Harry hurried over, and together he and Ron peered in the great hall. Emerald candles were hovering in mid-air over four long crowned tables, making the golden plate and goblet sparkle. Overhead, the bewitched ceiling, which always mirrored the sky outside, sparkled with stars. Though the force of pointed black Hogwarts hats, Harry saw a long line of scared-looking figures filing into the hall. Ginny was among them, easily visible because of her vivid Weasley hair. Meanwhile, Professor McGonagall, a bicycle with her hair in a tight bun, was placing the famous Hogwarts sorting hat on the stool before the newcomers. Every year, this age-old hat, patched, frayed, and dirty, stood into four Hogwarts houses: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Harry well remembered putting it on exactly 1 year ago and waiting for Petrify for its decision. It muttered aloud in his ear. For a few horrible seconds, he feared that the hat was going to put him in Slytherin, the house which had turned out more dark witches and wizards than any other. But he had ended up in Gryffindor, along with Ron, Hermione, and the rest of Weasley. Last term, Harry had helped, and Ron had helped Gryffindor win the house championship, beating Slytherin for the first time in 7 years. A very small, mousy hair boy had been called forward to place the hat on his head. Harry's eyes wandered past him to where Professor Dumbledore, the headmaster, sat watching the sorting from the staff table. His long silver beard and a half moon glass shining brightly in the candlelight. Several feet long, glasses shining brightly in the candlelight. Several feet long, Harry saw Gilderoy Lockhart, dressed in a robe of aquamarine, and there at the end was Hagrid, huge and hairy, drinking deeply from his goblet. "Hang on," Harry muttered to Ron. "There's an empty chair at the staff table. Where's Snape?" Professor Severus Snape was Harry's least favorite teacher. Harry had been to be Snape's least favorite student, cruel, oversassing, and disliked by everybody except a student from his own house, Slytherin. Snape taught potion. "Maybe he's ill," said Ron hopefully. "Maybe he's left," said Harry, "because he missed out on the defense against the dark art job again. Or he might have been sacked," said Ron honestly. "I mean, everyone hates him." "Or maybe," said a very cold voice right around them, "he's waiting to hear why you two didn't arrive on the school train." Harry spun around. There, his black robe ripping on a cold breeze, stood Severus Snape. He was the thin man with a sallow skin, hook nose, and greasy, shoulder-length black hair. And at this moment he was smiling in the way that told Harry he and Ron were in very deep trouble. "Follow me," said Snape, not daring even to look at each other. Harry and Ron followed Snape up the stair to the vast echoing entrance hall, which was lit with a flaming torch. A delicious smell of food was wafting from the great hall, but Snape led them away from the warmth and light, down the narrow stone staircase that led into the dungeon. "In," he said, opening a door halfway down the cold passageway and pointing. They entered Snape's office, shivering. The shadowy walls were lined with a shelf of large glass jar, in which floated all manner of revolting things. Harry didn't really want to know the name of at the moment. The fireplace was dark and empty. Snape looked at the door and turned to look at them. "So," he said softly, "the train isn't good enough for the famous Harry Potter and his faithful sidekick Weasley. Wanted to arrive with a bang, did we, boys?" "No, sir, it was the barrier at the King Cross. Silence," said Snape coldly. "What have you done with the card?" Ron gulped. This wasn't the first time Snape had given Harry the impression of being able to read mind, but a moment later he understood. As Fred unrolled today issue of the Evening Prophet. "You were seen," he hissed, showing them the headline. "Flying for an angel, a mystified muggle." He began to read aloud. "Two muggles in London convinced they saw an old car flying over the post office tower at noon in Norfolk. Mrs. Hetty Bayless's, while hanging out her washing, Miss Archer's fleet of purple," reported the police. "6 or 7 muggle in all. I believe your father worked in the issue of Muggle Artifact Office," he said, looking up at Ron and smiling more nastily. Dear, his own son." Harry felt as though he had just been walloped in his stomach by a mad tree, larger branch. If anyone found out Mr. Weasley had bewitched the car, he hadn't thought of that. "I noticed in my search of the park that considerable damage seemed to have been done in a very valuable whomping willow," Snape went on. "That tree did more damage to us than we," Ron blurted out. "Silence!" snapped Snape again. "Most unfortunately, you're not in my house, and the decision to expel you does not rest with me. I shall go and fetch the people who do have that happy power. You will wait here." Harry and Ron stared at each other, white faces. Harry didn't feel hungry anymore. He now felt extremely sick. He tried not to look at a large, slimy something suspended in a green liquid on a shelf behind Snape's desk. If Snape had gone to fetch Professor McGonagall, head of Gryffindor House, they're hardly any better off. She might be fairer than Snape, but she was still extremely strict. 10 minutes later, Snape returned, and sure enough, it was Professor McGonagall who accompanied him. Harry had seen Professor McGonagall angry on several occasions, but either he had forgotten just how thin her mouth could go, or he had never seen her this angry before. She raised her wand at the moment she entered. Harry and Ron both flinched, but she merely pointed at the empty fireplace, where flames suddenly erupted. "Sit," she said, and they both back in the chair by the fire. "Explain." she said in her glass clinking ominously. Ron launched in story, starting with Barry at the station, refusing to let them through. So we had no choice, Professor. We couldn't get on the train. Why didn't you send us an owl? A letter by owl? I believe you have an owl, Professor McGonagall said coldly to Harry. Harry gasped at her. Now she said it. That seemed the obvious thing to have done. I didn't think of that. That, said Professor McGonagall, is obvious. There was a knock on the office door, and Snape, now looking happier than ever, opened it. There stood the headmaster, Professor Dumbledore. Harry's whole body went numb. Dumbledore was looking unusually grave. He stared down his very crooked nose at them, and Harry suddenly found himself wishing he and Ron were still being beaten up by the Whomping Willow. There was a long silence. Then Dumbledore said, "Please explain why you did this." It would have been better if he had shouted. Harry hated the disappointment in his voice. For some reason, he was unable to look Dumbledore in the eyes, and spoke instead to his niece. He told Dumbledore everything except that the Mr. Weasley owned a bewitched car, and making it sound as though he and Ron had happened to find a flying car parked outside the station. He knew Dumbledore would see through this at once, but Dumbledore asked no question about the car. When Harry had finished, he merely continued to peer at them through his spectacle. "We'll go and get our stuff," said Ron in a hopeless sort of voice. "What are you talking about, Weasley?" barked Professor McGonagall. "Well, you're expelling us, aren't you?" said Ron. Harry looked quickly at Dumbledore. "Not today, Mr. Weasley," said Dumbledore. "But I must impress upon you the seriousness you have done. I'll write in to bother your family tonight. I must also warn you that if you do anything like this again, I will have no choice but to expel you." Snape looked us through, though Christmas had been cancelled. He cleared his throat and said, "Professor Dumbledore, these boys have floated the decree of the restriction of underage wizardry, caused serious damage on old and valuable trees. Surely act of this nature. It'll be for the Professor McGonagall to decide on these boy punishments, Severus," said Dumbledore calmly. "They are in her house, and they're therefore her responsibility." He turned to Professor McGonagall. "I must go back to the feast, Murnivar. I've got to give out a few notice. Come, Sarah, there's delicious looking custard tart I want to sample." Snape shot a look at a pure venom at Harry and Ron as he allowed himself to slip out of his office, leaving them alone with Professor McGonagall, who was still eyeing them like a wroth eagle. "You'd better get along to the hospital wing, Weasley. You're bleeding." "Not much," said Ron hastily, whipping out the cut over his eyes with his sleeve. "Professor, I want to watch my sister being sorted." "The sorting ceremony is over," said Professor McGonagall. "Your sister is also in Gryffindor." "Oh, good," said Ron. "And speaking of Gryffindor," Professor McGonagall said sharply, but Harry cut in. "Professor, when we took the car, Terma and started. So, Gryffindor shouldn't really have point taken from it, should it?" He finished, watching her anxiously. Professor McGonagall gave him a piercing look, but he was sure. She had almost smiled. Her mouth looked less thin, anyway. I will not take any point from Gryffindor," she said, and Harry hard to light it constantly. "But you'll both get a detention." It was better than Harry expected. As for Dumbledore, writing to Dursley, that was nothing. Harry knew perfectly well they just disappointed the Whopping Willow Hunt and squashed him flat. Professor McGonagall raised her wand again and pointed at Snape's desk. A large plate of sandwich, 2 silver goblets, and a jug of iced pumpkin juice appeared with a pop. "You'll eat in here, and then go straight up to the dormitory," she said. "I must also return to the feast." When the door closed behind her, Ron let out a long, low whistle. "I thought we'd had it," she said, grabbing a sandwich. "So did I," said Harry, taking one too. "Can you believe her luck, though?" said Ron thickly, through a mouthful of chicken and ham. "Fred and George must have flown that car 5 or 6 times, and no Muggle ever saw them." He swallowed and took another huge bite. "Why couldn't we get through the barrier?" Harry shrugged. "We'll have to watch our step from now on, though," he said, taking a grateful swig of pumpkin juice. "Wish we could have gone up to the feast. She didn't want us showing off." She didn't want us showing off," said Ron sagely. "Doesn't want people to think it's clever arriving by flying cars." When they had eaten as much as many sandwiches as they could. The plate kept refilling itself. They rose and left the office, treading the familiar path to Gryffindor Tower. The castle was quiet. It seemed the feast was over. They walked past muttering portrait and creaking suit of armor and climbed narrow flight of stone stair until at last they reached the passage where the secret stone stair. Until at last entrance to Gryffindor Tower was hidden behind an oil painting of a very fat woman in a pink silk dress. Password, she said as they approached. Said Harry. They didn't know the New Year's password, not having met a Gryffindor perfect yet, but help came almost immediately. They heard hurrying feet away. This is so cold. They heard hurrying feet behind them and turned to see Hermione dashing toward them. There you are! Where have you been? The most ridiculous rumor, someone said. You've been expelled for crashing a flying car. Well, we haven't been expelled, Harry assured her. You're not telling me you did fly here, said Hermione sounding almost as served as Professor McGonagall. Skip the lecture, said Ron impatiently, and tell us the new password. It's Wattlebird, said Hermione impatiently. But that's not the point. Her word were cut short. However, as the portrait of the fat lady swung open and there was a sudden thrown of clapping, it packed it looked as though the whole of Gryffindor house was still awake. Back in the circular common room, standing on lopsided table and squashy armchair, waiting for them to arrive. Arm reached through the portrait hole to pull Harry and Ron inside, leaving Hermione scramble in after them. Brilliant, yelled Lady Jordan. Inspired. What an entrance! Flying a car right into the Whomping Willow. People were talking about that one for years. Good on you, said a fifth year Harry had never spoken to. Someone was patting him on the back as though he just won a marathon. Fred and George pushed their way through the front. Cronin said together, Why couldn't you have called us back, eh? Ron was scarlet in the face, grinning embarrassedly. But Harry could see one person who didn't look happy at all. Percy was visible over the head of some excited first year, and he seemed to be trying to get near enough to start telling them off. Harry nudged Ron in the rib and nodded in the Percy direction. Ron got the point at once. Got to go upstairs. Bit tired, he said, and the two of them started pushing their way toward the door on the other side of the room, which had led to spiral staircase and the dormitories. Night, Harry called back to Hermione. He was wearing a scowl just like Percy. They managed to get the other side of the common room, still having their backs slapped, and gained the piece of the staircase. They hurried up it. Right to the top at last, they reached the door of their old dormitory, which now had a sign. It's saying, Second years, and they entered the familiar circular room, with its 5-4 poster hung with red velvet and its high narrow window. Their trunk had been brought up for them and placed at the end of their bed. Ron grinned guiltily at Harry. I know I should have enjoyed that or anything, but the dormitory boys flew open and came the other second-year Gryffindor boy, Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, and Neville Longbottom. Unbelievable, beamed Seamus. Cool, said Dean. Amazing, said Neville, awestruck. Harry couldn't help it. He grinned too.